There's a cave in the west of England where archaeologists found drinking cups. Nothing unusual about that. Except these cups were carved from human skulls. Deliberately shaped, smoothed at the edges, clearly made to be used, not just discarded. They're almost 15,000 years old, and they're not even the strangest thing found in that cave. This is the story of what happens to a diet when winter doesn't just make things harder. It makes almost everything you'd normally eat disappear. And the answer isn't just they were hungry. It's stranger, and in some places, considerably darker than that. Start with the basic problem. During the last ice age, winter in much of Europe wasn't a season you pushed through with stored grain in a pantry. There was no agriculture yet. Everything eaten had to be hunted, scavenged, or foraged in real time, in a landscape that, for months at a stretch, offered almost none of it. Plants died back completely. Many animals migrated or became scarce. The humans living through this had one overwhelming resource available in winter: whatever large animals they could kill. And that created a problem nobody really expects. You'd think meat is meat. If you can kill an animal, you're fed. But by late winter, many game animals are lean. They've burned through their own fat reserves just surviving the cold, the same way the humans hunting them have. And eating meat that's almost entirely lean protein, with almost no fat, creates a genuine medical condition, what later Arctic explorers would call rabbit starvation. The explorer Vilhjálmur Stephenson lived on an all-meat diet for extended stretches in the early 1900s specifically to test this, and documented it directly. Eat too much lean protein with too little fat, and your body can't process it properly. You can be eating constantly, technically consuming enough calories, and still be starving. Nausea, diarrhea. Eventually, if it goes on long enough, death from a diet that looks, on paper, like it should be keeping you alive. Which meant Ice Age humans weren't just hunting for calories in the winter, they were hunting specifically for fat. And that single fact explains some of the strangest looking behavior in the entire archaeological record. At Paleolithic sites across Ice Age Europe, archaeologists consistently find animal long bones that have been deliberately smashed, not broken by accident, not chewed by scavengers, but cracked open with clear, repeated, purposeful force. They were going for the marrow. Bone marrow is dense in fat, exactly the nutrient a body starved of it desperately needs. Cracking open a leg bone for the soft, fatty tissue inside wasn't a fringe survival trick. It was a routine, expected part of how an animal carcass got used, especially in winter, especially when every other fat source had already run out. Brains got the same treatment for the same reason, another fat-dense organ, worth the effort of cracking open a skull to reach. None of this required desperation beyond the ordinary. This was just what eating an animal properly meant, in a season with nothing to spare. But marrow and brain only get you so far when an entire landscape turns hostile for months at a time. And this is where the evidence starts pointing somewhere much harder to look at directly. In 1986, and in more detailed excavations since, archaeologists working in Gough's cave in Cheddar Gorge, England, uncovered human bones roughly 14,700 years old, not buried respectfully, cut, defleshed. Long bones cracked open in exactly the same deliberate way as the animal bones found alongside them, consistent with marrow extraction. And those skull cups, carefully shaped, edges smoothed, clearly made for repeated use, not a one-time act. Dr. Sylvia Bello and her colleagues at the Natural History Museum in London, who conducted detailed analysis of these remains, found cut mark patterns essentially identical to how the site's animal remains had been processed. Whoever did this treated human bodies using the same technique, the same tools, the same fat extraction logic as they used on deer and horses. Here's where it's important to slow down, because this is exactly the point where a documentary usually picks the more dramatic answer and moves on. The honest answer is, archaeologists don't fully agree on why this happened. There are two real interpretations, and both have serious researchers behind them. One interpretation is that this was survival cannibalism, that in a period of severe nutritional stress, human bodies became another source of exactly the fat and calories the group desperately needed, processed with the same practical logic as any other food source. The other interpretation is that this was a funerary or ritual practice, a way of treating and honoring the dead that had nothing to do with hunger, and that the skull cups in particular may have held ceremonial rather than nutritional meaning. The physical evidence, cut marks, marrow extraction, is consistent with either explanation. It's the motive, not the act itself, that remains genuinely unresolved. Gough's cave isn't an isolated case either. At El Cedron in Spain and Moulaguercy in France, archaeologists have found Neanderthal remains, not modern humans, an entirely separate hominin species, with the same kind of cut marks, the same signs of deliberate processing, dating dated to tens of thousands of years earlier. The same ritual versus survival debate applies there too. What's striking is that this pattern, humans or human relatives, processing their own dead using food preparation techniques, doesn't appear to be a single freak event. It shows up more than once, in unconnected times and places, whenever conditions apparently got hard enough. And there's a broader climate detail that makes the survival stress interpretation at least plausible as a contributing factor, even if it can't be proven for any single site. The Younger Dryas, a sudden and severe cold snap that hit roughly 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, dramatically disrupted ecosystems across parts of the northern hemisphere right around the era Gough's cave dates to. Megafauna populations that Ice Age humans depended on for winter fat came under serious pressure during exactly this window. It doesn't prove what happened in that specific cave, but it establishes that the kind of extreme nutritional stress that could drive people toward extreme measures wasn't a hypothetical. It was actually happening in the right place, at the right time. So what did ancient humans eat when winter killed everything else? The honest, layered answer is whatever still had fat in it. Marrow, cracked from bone with the same deliberate force used on every difficult problem winter created. Brains, for the same reason. And in at least some documented, physically verified cases. Each other in a practice we can prove happened, but can't fully prove why. That last part matters. It would be easy to end this on the most shocking possible note and call it a day. But the actual responsible answer is messier than that and more interesting for it. The physical evidence is certain. The motive behind it may never be. What we're left with isn't a simple answer. It's a genuinely difficult question, sitting in a cave in England in the shape of a 15,000-year-old drinking cup that somebody, for reasons we may never fully understand, decided to keep using. This file stays open.